So welcome to the third video on the radius arm. In this video we're actually going to install the phosphor bronze bush and we're going to ream it to size using the adjustable reamer. So the first thing we're going to do is pull the bearing or the phosphor bronze bush into the radius arm. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the bush. This comes as part of the radius arm repair kit, and this can only go in one end and it goes in the outside end of the radius arm, or the wheel side I suppose you'd call it. So this is my radius arm. It's got to go in there, and the way we do it is to draw it in using a piece of stud bar. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. I've got a piece of M10 stud bar through the radius arm. I've got a nut and a big washer on the inside end, and on this side where the bush is I've got the same, but hopefully I'll just zoom in, you can see that. Focus please, thank you. And now all I need to do is keep everything in central position as I can, and then tighten that up. Now this is going to be in my way, that's the camera, but hopefully you'll see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've just changed the position. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. Shouldn't take too much force, and that will draw that in. I have to be honest, the first one I did was a lot easier than this. The further you go, the harder it does get. So you might actually have to use a ratchet eventually. Okay, so this isn't ideal. I've just had to put it on the floor to get that last bit in. Put my foot on it and hopefully I should be able to do this. Okay, so finally that has gone tight, so that is now in. Right, so that is the bush pulled in. That was really quite awkward. The first one I did was so much easier. There you go. Now it's time to get the reamer out. Right, so the adjustable reamer. There's quite a lot to say about this. So as explained in the other videos, the blade for a hand adjustable reamer, the first third of the cutting surface should be tapered. The last remaining 2/3 should be parallel. Now you can see these blades, there are 6 blades and they sit in slots. Here the slot is deep, here the slot is shallow. You have adjustment nut on the top and bottom. If you want to make the hole bigger, you undo this one, then tighten that one. That moves the blades down. The slot being shallower, the blades come out. If you want to make it smaller, do the opposite, undo the top one, tighten up the bottom one, that will push the blades up deeper into the slot and make the hole smaller. So that's the principle. In practice, I think it's best just to take a very small cut at a time, particularly with hand reamers. If you try to take a big cut, you'll find the tool will judder in the hole. Also, it's worth mentioning that taking measurements across the blades is quite awkward to do, because when you use the reamer, it tends to push the cutting blades further into the slots. So what you might measure with a micrometer, it will end up cutting slightly differently. So it's best to take small cuts at a time and see how it fits with the actual new shaft. So when you're adjusting these, it's best to keep both nuts turning at the same time. What you don't want to happen is swarf, get underneath the cones, underneath there and down the bottom, because that could make one blade slightly longer or shorter than the others. So I don't know really where I'm starting, so I'm going to start at that. Don't put too much pressure on these to nip it up. But what we're hoping is that will now go in to the bushing nearly a third. Okay, so I'm happy this is adjusted correctly. The blades go down to about there in the hole, which is a good sign. But before I get carried away, I'm actually going to micrometer check across 3 sets of blades there, just to make sure they're all the same size. Doesn't matter what size they are, but they all need to be the same size, just to make sure one of those blades hasn't popped out or got a bit of swarf underneath it. So what I've done is I've adjusted the reamer so it actually fits fully into the bush, and see, it goes all the way in there and it gets nice and snug at the end. I can still turn it so it's not actually doing any cutting, but it's approximately the same size as the bush at the moment. What that means is that's my starting point, so I can now start adjusting it to take a little bit off at a time. So the adjustment I've just made was half a turn of the nuts, so it's marginally bigger, and at that point I'm just going to take a cut. Okay, so I don't know if the cameras are really picking this up. I'm actually sat on the floor with the radius arm in my lap, and that gives me a good feel of how the reamer is cutting. I've got an adjustable on the reamer. I also hold the reamer on the shank so you can feel it and hopefully ease out any juddering. You don't want to be pushing it in, you just want to be nicely turning it and let it feed itself down into the hole. Okay, so that's nicely feeding into the hole. I don't know if you can actually see it. It's very awkward to record this at the same time. And you want to try and get all those blades down into that hole. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now, this is an important bit as well. When you get to the end and you want to bring it out, don't go backwards. Carry on going forwards, just put a little bit of pressure going up. It's easier said than done. You can, there you go, it's coming up. If it gets too tight, you can use a mole grip on it. More grip on the shank, I should say. So I can see a little bit of debris on that. Focus please, camera. Thank you. There you go. I think you can see that. There's a little bit of material being taken off there. You really don't want to see much more than that on any one cut. So now we've gone through on that, we can do another half a turn. And I would just do half a turns, keep on checking it and make sure it hasn't gone too big. Okay, I should say at this point, once you've taken a cut, you need to just clean away that debris, that swarf. I just use a spray oil to get rid of that. Okay, so I've just taken a second cut, that was half a turn on those nuts. And another thing you really want to be looking at is the amount of debris that is on each blade. You want approximately the same amount, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they've all got approximately the same amount of swarf on them. So that's a good sign that all the blades are nice and the same depth. So it's time for another half a turn. Okay, so this is the 5th cut, adjusting the reamer half a turn every time. It always goes in up to about there, which is a good sign, and then it's not too much effort to get it to cut. Okay, so I've been keeping note of the measurements of the adjustable reamer each time I make a cut. So the readings are taken after I've made the cut and after I've cleaned off the swarf. And you can see for each flat it's approximately 0.05 millimeters. Now I did measure the reamer after I'd finished doing the last one, and the final reading was 20.80 millimeters. So I'm currently at 20.66, so that means I'm getting quite close. So I have tried the shaft at this point, and no, it does not fit. So I'm going to carry on for another 2 cuts and see how close it is. Okay, so the reamer now measures at 20.77. Like I said, it's 20.8 on the last one. And when I put this in, I can feel it just start to go in. But it's kind of stepping, so it's very, very tight. So I don't want to push it in any further, but I just need to take a very small cut off. So not even a half of a flat this time. I think it will be no more than about an eighth. Okay, so I've been taking it very, very carefully, and I've now got a shaft that does actually fit in the hole. It's very tight at the moment. So the next thing I would suggest do is don't rush, just take the shaft out again. First you try it in the other way to make sure it's concentric. And again, it's nice and tight. I can't get it in there. And it's lovely and concentric. But then take the shaft out, let it cool down, because this actually gets a bit warm as you're reaming it. So let it cool down for a few minutes, then go through with the reamer again without adjusting it. Just clean off the swarf and go through again. And hopefully everything will fit. So the next thing we've got to do now we're happy with that bush is to put this plastic tube in. It's very easy to forget. Now the tube is not parallel, it actually has a small end and a big end. The small end goes in first, and that actually sits behind the phosphor bush, so you need to push that in. I found the best way to do it is find a nice fitting socket and tap it in. So this works good to start with. This is a spark plug socket. And then just finish it off with this, hopefully. See, that's going in nicely. So now the tube is in, we can now pull in the roller bearing. Now this has a slightly curved end on one and flat on the other side, so obviously the curved end goes in first, and that we're just going to pull in using the stud bar again. I'm fairly confident this is going to go in nicely. The bush was quite hard, but this seems, yeah, this one's going in quite nicely. Starting to get stiff as I'm drawing more in, so I'm just going to put that on the floor and do it on the floor. Okay, so it's getting late in the evening, in fact it's past 10 o'clock, so I'm just going to finish this off. I'm happy with all the bearings, so I just push that shaft in. You can see it gets a little bit tight before it's fully in, but it does push in and it still turns quite nicely, so I'm quite happy with that. The next thing to do is to put the rubbers on, then these with that offset groove on the inside, and then the spring washers and the nuts. So these rubbers, it's easier to put them on at the end. They should go over the top there. So they're actually sitting on that and on the top of the washer. And that's the radius arm bearings done.